Harry. And now I'm going to hand it over to Bob Ainsworth, who I think many of you saw his previous presentation on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum theft, which you raved about and you immediately wanted him back. So he's back, and today he's talking about fleecers, swindlers, and con artists. Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Hi, how you all doing? Thanks for showing up. This is actually a pretty big crowd. So how it has tended to work is the Gardner one, say I'll get like 40 people. And when I do this one, I get around 20. And I don't know why. It's just, there's more people know about the Gardner and they're not sure about this. So, they show up or don't show up, but that's fine. I have done this in front of two people, which is fine. They showed up and I was getting paid, so I did what I was going to do, and they were happy, and so it all worked out. So the piece of paper I handed out was just something for you to think about, because part of this, it's entertainment, but it's also a little educational. So it's about what are con games? How do people try and scam you out of your money? And not only what do they do, but what are they like? What are the attributes of people who do that? And what are some of the attributes of people who get scammed? Not everybody, but what are some of the attributes? And so you can keep little notes if you want, or you don't have to, it doesn't matter. But it's just something to think about while I'm going through this. So, right, so can you see what's going on in that picture? Right, somebody has taken a gray mule and is painting stripes on it to turn it into a zebra. And so I don't know if any of you remember a movie and a play called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum with Zero Mostel. And that's out of this. That's in the opening credits of that scene, which is a fantastic, it's Zero Mostel, Buster Keaton, Phil Silver, just great comedy actors. So that's clearly somebody trying to pull over something. I'm sure all you remember the movie The Sting, right? Paul Newman, Robert Redford, great story. Then there's this one. You might not have heard this one. It's called Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Michael Caine and Steve Martin, and I forget the actress's name, but she's very, very good. So it's basically they are trying to scam her, and she scams them, but then she comes back because she enjoyed stealing their money so much, she wanted to keep doing that on other people. So it's really a very funny story. So what does that look like to you? In where? Exactly. Would you buy swampland in Florida? I hope not. How about that one? The Brooklyn Bridge. Would you like to buy the Brooklyn Bridge? It was for sale. People bought the Brooklyn Bridge. How about that? The Eiffel Tower. That was for sale for a while. You could have owned the Eiffel Tower. How about this one? You have to look at this one a little closer. So what does it look like? It's a box, and what's in the box? That's the original black box. So you'd put in like a $5 bill, somebody would turn a crank, and out would come a 20. So then you would buy the box from them so you could do it, and clearly the whole thing was a complete fake. But that was the idea for the original black box. One of the earliest scams that was going on was really more of an insurance scam, was called bottomry. And what somebody would do, this is in ancient Greeks, was borrow money to buy grain. They'd put the grain on a boat, they'd sail it off into the Mediterranean. Then they'd tell the person who they'd borrow the money from that, oh, the boat sunk. It hadn't. They would change the name on the boat, sail to a different port, sell the grain, sell the boat, and then go on and keep doing it. So that was called bottomry. That was sort of an early one. Then there's this one. So those are the Praetorian Guard in Rome, and their job was to protect the emperor, sort of like the Secret Service does today. Except what they did was they killed the emperor and then put the job of emperor up for auction, and if you had enough money, you could become the next emperor. So in a way, it's sort of another scam. They're just figuring out a way that they could sell something that wasn't theirs. You recognize that. Shroud of Turin. I hate to disappoint you, that is not the image of Jesus Christ. It was created, the earliest they have it is 1350s, and it's just charcoal and some other paint, some other coloring. It was not what they said it was, but they would sell, miracles for it. Come in, you can touch it, you see it, you give money to the church, away they go. This is one of the earliest stock frauds. This is a guy named George McGregor, British officer, member of Parliament. So he told people that he owned land in a Central American country called Poye. Okay? So people would give him money to buy their share of Poye, which was near Honduras. You know what I'm going to tell you. There was no Poye, but he outfitted 5 or 6 boatloads of people who took off from England and sailed to Central America and found jungle. He said he was the chieftain, and he got people through newspaper ads. Now, you have to remember, this is 1800s. People's education was very low. They had no idea. They were thinking maybe this was like the new world. Instead of going to the United States, you're going to Central America. So they fooled people. And a clear Poye didn't exist. This guy, George C. Parker, he was the one who sold the Brooklyn Bridge. What he would do would be he would get immigrants right off the boat, and he would sell them the rights to put up a toll booth on the bridge. So they would pay him money, they would go up on the bridge, they'd erect a structure, they'd try and collect money, they would get arrested, their booth would be taken down, and he would do it again. And he kept over and over selling the Brooklyn Bridge until he was sent to Sing Sing for life. So he got his, but along the way, he was selling the Brooklyn Bridge. This guy's pretty famous, but he's not American. He's European. Victor Lusig. So he had a couple of scams. One was the Eiffel Tower. And in the early 1900s, France was getting tired of the upkeep of the Eiffel Tower, and there was a proposal to take it down and sell it for scrap metal. So he came up with the idea that he would sell the scrap metal, even though he had no right to the Eiffel Tower at all. So he entertained people, he got a nice hotel, it's just like a regular stock scam, and eventually somebody gave him a bunch of money so that they could have the scrap metal from the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, didn't work out. But it was clever. He also had another scam where he would, now remember, this was before radio or telegraph to exist, but not for boats. So he would get on a boat in Europe. While he was going across the Atlantic, he would sell people shares in a non-existent Broadway play. They had no way of checking. So he gets off the boat in New York, scams with their money, they're out of luck. He takes the next boat back to Europe and just keeps crossing back and forth, scamming people by selling them shares in a play that was never going to be produced, never even existed. And he's also the guy that did the black box. That was his scam. So he was a pretty clever guy. So all of this is sort of leading to, what is a Ponzi scheme? And what was it called before Ponzi? Because people were doing this way before Charles Ponzi did it in Boston in 1920. So what it was called before was robbing Peter to pay Paul. Now that phrase comes from, so you have to do a little history. Remember Henry VIII? had one wife, wanted to divorce her and get married again. So he broke from the Catholic Church and started the Church of England. The Catholic Church is St. Peter's. The Church of England is St. Paul's. So what he did was he was taking money that was supposed to go to St. Peter's. He was robbing Peter to put the money in to pay for St. Paul's. So he was robbing Peter, St. Peter's, the Catholic Church, to pay for Paul, his own church. And that's where it came about. But it really means you're using money that's supposed to go to one person to pay another, which is sort of the basis of a Ponzi scheme. So here's how a Ponzi scheme works. I'm going to divide the group here into groups. So you're group A. I tell you I'm going to give you 50% on your money. You give me a bunch of money. I tell you I'm going to pay you in 6 months. I come over here to group B. I tell you guys the same thing. You give me money, but I take your money and I pay them. Back there, I have group C. I tell them the same thing. I take their money and pay group B. Then I have group D, and I do the same thing. So the trick is you always have to have new people to scam with bigger and bigger amounts. And that's what a Ponzi scheme is. Your money to pay them, your money to pay them, da, 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 da. And as long as there's more idiots giving you money, you're good. And that's how a Ponzi scheme works. It's really pretty simple. And you usually have to offer an extraordinary return. It can't be like 5%. It's got to be like 10% a week, or 50% in 45 days, which is what Ponzi did. So here's the first Ponzi scheme that I could find a record of. And this woman was in Bavaria. She was an actress, and as she got older, she couldn't get parts anymore. Now remember, this is mid-1860s. There's hardly any banks. There's definitely no banking laws. There's no bank commissioners. There's no Federal Reserve. Nothing like that at all to protect anybody. And most people barely have a high school education. So she set up a bank in her hotel room. And she said she would pay 10% in 2 months. So if you do the quick math, right, 6 times that is 60%. She became the wealthiest woman in Bavaria, took in a ton of money, and there was nothing illegal about it. They eventually charged her just with bad accounting, but that was the only laws that were on the books. There was nothing else to charge her with. She did 3 years in jail, and she raised, from what I could see, 400 million euros, which is a lot of money. Okay? So that was the first one I could find. So here's another one. This guy named Ferdinand Ward, and he went into business with somebody named Grant, and they set up a firm called Grant and Ward. And that Grant was the son of Ulysses Grant, the president. So the son puts in $200,000. The president put in $100,000 in those days' money. The whole thing goes south. Everybody loses their money. They lose their houses. President Grant has to write his memoirs because he's broke. There's the president. And they promised 2% return every month because they said President Grant would give them special contracts. Again, nonsense, but yeah, okay, fine, you're the president's son, maybe it'll work. They bought big homes, and then everything went south. Per Ward, he was robbing Peter to pay Paul. They all knew this scam. So there's a Boston version of the same thing, and the woman on the far right is named Sarah Howe. Sarah said that she was getting money from Quakers in Pennsylvania to help single women. So she opened up the ladies' deposit company in the South End. Now, she was kind of clever. She did no advertising. The only way she would take your money is if somebody else who was already a client referred you, and you had to keep quiet about it. She didn't want the publicity. She promised 2% a month, which is 24%, which is obviously impossible. She was put in jail for raising money under false pretenses. And then she did it again in Boston. When she got caught, she went to Chicago and did it again. And then she left Chicago and came back to Boston the third time, and then they finally caught her and threw her in jail. She wasn't very imaginative, but she was very persistent. And she just kept running the same scam. Here's another one in New York called William Miller. And they called him 520% Miller because he promised 10% a week. 52 times 10, 520. So he raised $1 million and eventually got caught and went to jail, just like all of them. So this is where I want you to start thinking about my 3 questions. What is it that makes a confidence game? Well, I've already told you some of it. You have to have an outrageous promise of a return to make people say, well, you know, I know this can't be true, but maybe it is, so I'll do it. What are confidence people like? They have no conscience. They are trying to take your money. They don't care how you wind up. They want your money. And what are people like who get fooled by these? Not all the time, but sometimes the people are as greedy as the people who are running the con. Because they're like, you know, if I can get 10% a week, I can do this for 6 months, I'll get out and I'll be rich. Not going to happen. So just thinking about what these different things have in common. So let's think about 1920. This is when Charles Ponzi started in Boston. There was a fictional scammer. A guy wrote a book with a character called J. Rufus Wallingford, and they made a bunch of movie shorts, 15-minute movies, and they were all about him scamming people. And then there were some kids who lost money, and he helps them. So he's a bad guy and a good guy at the same time. That's the actor who played him. And they did 14 episodes. So these were out at the time Ponzi was thinking about what he was going to do. Because he came to Boston in 1903 and ran his scam in 1920. So this was out there. These were very famous book and famous movies. So at this time, there was no rules against child labor, right? So kids were working. Most people just went through grammar school, some through high school, very few through college, so they didn't have a lot of financial education. People were making 33 cents an hour. A family lived on something like $2,500 a year, 3,200. But you can see, people were living on a family on $1,000. CPAs had only started in the early 1900s in Massachusetts, so there weren't a lot of those around. The Federal Reserve, right, which controls money and moves checks around and all that, had only been created in 1913 and had really no powers at the time, so that wasn't anything to help people out. And the FDIC, the thing that guarantees your money in checking accounts, that was only started with FDR in the 30s. So there were really very few backstops to help people who got taken. Then there was this. Remember in Boston, 1919, the molasses flood? So it was down, the tank on the Southeast Expressway with the painting on it? Imagine something that big with hot molasses exploding. and the power that would do. And it just bent metal. It wrecked the railroad. A couple of dozen people died. 150 were injured. It was a massive, massive catastrophe. There were 7 newspapers in Boston at the time, most of them with 2 editions. Remember, no radio, no TV, no internet. And this was the big story. Who were those guys? Sacco and Vanzetti. That happened in April. This was the big story going on at the time. So Ponzi, like I said, went from January through August of 1920, no coverage at all. Certainly not any coverage saying this guy's running a scam. Nothing. Silence. And then came our buddy. So there's his full name. He was Italian, well educated. He went to university there. Came over in 1903. He had money when he left Europe, but when he got here, he had lost it all gambling, so he was broke. There's his, see if I get this to work today. Oh, there it goes. So here's his boat that he came over on, the Vancouver, Carlo Ponzi. I'm very happy that technology worked. So, by the way, how I do that is, see the red, look at the red dot. The glass sucks it up, so you have to have a special one of these. Anyway, so he went to work for a restaurant in the North End and proceeded to steal money. He was stealing tips, he was stealing from the cash register, and so he gets kicked out and goes up to Montreal. In Montreal, he gets hired to be a banker by this guy named Luigi Zarossi. Luigi Zarossi is running a Ponzi scheme. He's telling people, I'm going to help my fellow Italians. I will pay you a higher interest rate than those other banks run by, the Anglos. So give your money to me. Complete nonsense. Ponzi worked for this guy, and that's where he learned it. But Zarossi left when he was going to be arrested. And he asked Ponzi to take care of his family. So Ponzi says okay, and what does he do? He steals a blank check, forges the signature, and gets caught cashing the check. So he was arrested there as Charles Ponzi, slightly different spelling. And he was also Charles Bianchi. And here's what he looked like. Now remember that first picture I put up? He's a chameleon, right? He looked one way. This is how he looked for this arrest. So he does a couple of years in jail, gets out, and tries to smuggle illegal immigrants into the United States. But this time that's a United States federal crime, not a Canadian crime. So he gets thrown into jail down here, and now this is what he looks like. Like I said, he can make himself look very different. So he did a couple of years in jail down in Atlanta, finally gets kicked out, and he roams the South doing all sorts of odd jobs. And then he gets to New York, and he sees an ad to be a clerk in Boston. And he's like, well, I left there in 2006. This is 10 years later. Nobody's going to remember me. I'm going back to Boston. So he does. And he gets a job working for a guy named J.R. Poole in South Market of Faneuil Hall. And then he meets the love of his life, Rose Ginecco. And they get married fairly soon after. There's the wedding certificate. Let's see if I can get the technology to work again. There we go. So there's Charles, and there's Rose. So now he's calling himself a salesman. So he's gone from, cook to crooked banker to smuggling immigrants to clerk. Now he says he's a salesman. Not really sure that he is, but that's okay. Anyway, they get married. By the way, she stuck with him up through about the 1930s when he got deported. Here's where they lived. So this is the census. So there he is, Charles Ponzi. And now he's calling himself a foreign exchange expert. So now he's gone from salesman down, now he knows foreign exchange, which probably just means he knows, a lira from a dollar, but that's okay. And that's where they lived. And that's what he looked like now. Again, he's changed himself. Totally different. Yeah, I think he was doing that long. So everything he tries, he fails at. He leaves J.R. Poole and he goes to work running Rose Gineco's father and uncle's fruit stand. It goes belly up in about 3 months. Then he decides to open up an import-export company, but he has 2 troubles. He has nothing to import because he has no money, and he has nothing to export. But other than that, he's going to be good at this. So what does he do? He steals 5,000 pounds of cheese. 5,000 pounds, right? That's almost 3 tons. That's a lot of cheese. And it would have been nice, he got arrested, but the case was dismissed because they spelled the name with an S instead of a Z. So he got off. He had the cheese, he could sell the cheese, but he didn't go to jail. Then he tries to start a magazine on how to run an import-export business, which he doesn't know how to do, but he tries to start a magazine on that. That fails, of course. So there was a thing in Boston called the Boston Directory, which listed all the businesses and where they were. So here he is in the Niles building, 227, the Bostonian Advertising Company, Charles Ponzi, import-export. But something happens. When he's trying to sell that magazine, he gets a stamp, and I'll pass this around. He gets a stamp that's called an International Reply Coupon. So I'll show it up here, but you can just pass it. And it's sort of like prepaid postage. So it was meant to foster letters between different countries because people wouldn't have the right amount of postage or the right kind. So all the countries in Europe and the United States did this. He understands that there's a slight value change in different stamps. So in the US, you might pay 3 cents. Another country, you might pay a penny. So he's thinking, I can make 2 cents on a stamp. But to make a lot of money at 2 cents, you'd need 8 billion stamps. But he doesn't see that as a problem yet. So here's what these things look like. So those are 3 of them. So it's just to exchange postage. So his idea was this. He could make a little bit of money on each stamp, so he'd have to have a lot of stamps. So here's what he said. You give me money. I will go buy the stamps. I'll make money because I can turn the stamps into cash, and then I'll pay you back from those profits. That was his shtick. He said he'd give a 50% return in 45 days. So 45.90, it's like 6 times. That's like 400%, I think. And he's just going to buy all these stamps all over the world. There were a couple of problems, though. So here's one of his, it's also being passed around. So this is what he gave people. It was a promissory note. You didn't even get the stamps. All you got was a promise on something that he had printed up at a local printer that says, I, Charles Ponzi, will pay you, and here it's Principe Santarosi. You give me $200, I'll give you $300. 50%, 45 days. That's all you got. You gave him cash, he gave you this thing promising that he was going to do this. The reality was there were only 100,000 of these stamps in the world. Not millions, 100,000. A. B, you couldn't turn them into cash. It was stamp for stamp. There was no way to get cash out of this thing. So other than those 2 things, and he was robbing Peter to pay Paul. He was going to do what I said with the groups. So here's his scam. So he starts in the fall, and he tries to get rich people to invest, but they're actually too smart. That's why they're rich. So what does he do? He goes after Italians. It's called an affinity scam. You go after people who are like you, so they will trust you. So he went after fellow Italians who were uneducated. Clearly, he did not care that he was hurting these people. December 1919, he gives out his first one to this guy, Ettore Ghiberti, turns him into a salesman, giving him 10% on what he brings in. And then in February, he pays off his first group. He took Groups B money to pay off Group A. Word starts to spread. Oh, by the way, February 27th, he redeems his wife's jewelry. He had pawned it without telling her. She noticed, but he didn't ask her permission. So here's how much money he took in month by month and how many people he scammed. Now remember, in a year, people only lived on $2,000 or $3,000. So he took in about half a year's money from a family. Oh no, just watch. Now he's up to about 2 families worth. No wows yet. Oh no, wait. Word's getting out. No advertising, all referrals, no radio. People are just hearing about it. He's opening up more offices. He ended up with 30 offices all over New England. Tons of salespeople out there. Oh no, it gets better. This is in those days' money, not today's days' money. The average person put in $300. June, he took in $2.5 million. There were lines outside. This is month by month.
Yeah, but I'm saying 6 months.
Yeah. So in total, now he did more in August. He actually got caught like August 10th. But at the end of the day, there were like 30,000 people and somewhere between 10 and $15 million in those days' money. That's how much he took in. So you can see, as word gets out, it's just exponential. And more people's like, I got to get in on this thing. So they do. So here's where he was. So he was at 27 School Street. It's just down the road from the Parker House, across from Old City Hall. Okay, in that building is now Ruth Chris Steakhouse. So that's what it looked like in 1880, and that's what it looks like today. So he was on the 2nd floor. And there he is looking dapper. He was very short. He was 5'2". That's his wife and his mother, who Imelda, he brought over from Italy. And this is people lining up. It looked like a bank, right? It had a wall, it had a cage, it had people behind the cage. It looked legit. So this is the house he bought in May. It's in Lexington. It's still there. So I went to the Lexington Concord, Minuteman thing, and I drove past it. It's a really nice house, right? You can drive up this street here, right there. I think it sold for like $1.5 million a year or so ago. This is the car he drove. This was the top of the line, except for a Rolls Royce. This was a nice car. You can see how short he is. But look at his office. You'd expect an office of somebody who's making $10 million to look good. That's not much of an office, right? And here he is filling out one of those little forms, right? He's just signing away, saying, yeah, I'll pay you 50%. So he had so much money, he started buying other things. Macaroni Company, a construction company. He bought the place who hired him. When he came to Boston, he bought that guy out. He bought a sardine company, a meatpacking company. He owned 4 banks. So when he was short of cash, he had banks. That's where he got his money from, his cash, like to pay people out. And he also owned tenements, gave out mortgages, all that sort of thing. He was pretty diversified. He finally got busted found guilty in November and did jail time until 1924. Then he was arrested on state charges. Those were federal. He got arrested and skipped, and he went to Florida. And guess what he did in Florida? You know what he's going to do. So now this is what he looks like again. Again, a different look. Changed his name. Sold swampland in Florida. Gets caught. Now he's looking like this because he escapes. I'm telling you, he made himself look different. He was boarding a boat to leave the country, and he gets sent back to Charlestown to do jail time. There's his wife. Finally, she divorced him after he was deported. There he is, the boat, and there he is when he ended up in Brazil. And, so this is his indictment. I just find it interesting finding. So he was defrauding diverse persons. There's Charles Ponzi of Lexington. Here. Ponzi's own use and benefit. So taking money from other people for his own benefit. Here's his bankruptcy papers. So, he did go bankrupt. And he died in Brazil with only enough money to bury him. $75. This is what I find interesting. So this is what he thought. Without malice aforethought, I have given them, people in Boston, the best show that was ever staged in their territory since the landing of the Pilgrims. It was worth the $15 million to watch me put this over on them. He thought it was entertaining that he was making all these people go bankrupt and thought it was fun. That's the mind of somebody like this. They are a psychopath. They don't care about you at all. So how did he get away with it for so long? Where was the post office, right? These were stamps. Where were the government officials? Where were the newspapers? So the post office, I'll go through this quick, but they sent him a whole bunch of nasty notes saying, "Dear Mr. Ponzi, stop doing it." And he was just like, pfft. They never put notices in the newspaper. There was no radio, no TV. Nothing happened. So he just kept ignoring it all along. This guy sent him a really nasty note. IRCs are not intended as a medium of speculation. He's like, pfft. And then he just kept going. Eventually, some of the countries stopped issuing those stamps because of what he was doing. Where was the government? This guy was the head of small loans for the state. And all he said was, if Ponzi wants to pay 50%, which is stupid, but if he wants to do that, he can do it. He didn't think at all about the people on the other side or that it was even possible. He just said, yeah, he's not breaking a law, let him do it. So he just sort of said, sure, go ahead. The newspapers could not say anything at the time. If you printed something bad about somebody, even if it was true, you got sued as the newspaper. That didn't change till the 1960s. So you couldn't even print something true and say, but it's true. No. You would get sued. So they didn't want to run anything because they would get taken to court. So there was no Washington Post, Woodward Bernstein, all that didn't exist. Excuse me. So here's the first notice about Ponzi, and it's a little hard to see, but so Boston Traveler, and it doesn't even really talk about him. It doesn't name him, but it calls him Mr. Get Rich Quick. And it was mostly positive. It said, here's this guy, he's doing this investment, he's going to give you 50%. This is a good thing. So that's the first one out there. So he's already 5 months into his scam. July 24th, he doubles your money within 3 months. They name him out. They say he's worth $9 million. This is a positive guy. He's solid. Give him your money. So people do. Everything was still positive, and here he's almost 7 months into his scam. Nobody has said a word yet. July 27th, he talks to the government officials, says the same thing. They let him keep going. His money is in Europe. He buys all this nonsense. So how was he finally caught? This guy, his name is Clarence Barron. He ran a financial newspaper in Boston called the Boston News Bureau. He also owned a little newspaper called, and he is Barron's. He was sort of the Horace Greeley of financial reporting. Nobody else was doing this. He had special reporters who were educated to explain things. He also had a newspaper in Philadelphia doing the same thing. He was the first one who figured out that Ponzi was running a scam. So here's where he was. He was on Kilby Street, Post Office Square. That was his building. So this is the best I could do. So the Boston Post quoted Barron so that they wouldn't get sued, so that he would get sued. But here what it says is, Barron says reply coupons work only in small way. This is the first time somebody's saying this is not right. And he questions his motive. Then, 2 days later, July 28th, he put something in his own newspaper. And now he's really calling Ponzi out. Nothing is discernible in postal figures to indicate this is possible. Where are the profits coming from? This guy used to be a shipping clerk. What are you, crazy, giving him your money? And he says nobody except his company can figure this out. July 28th, he puts more stuff out there about how crooked this thing is. Ponzi sues him for $1 million. The only government attorney who went after him was this guy, Daniel Gallagher, and he hired an auditor to go in and check Ponzi's books, which were a mess. It took him like 2-3 weeks to figure it out, but he eventually figures out that Ponzi is bankrupt. He owes way more than he has. And he gets him arrested. Ponzi pleads guilty, he goes to jail. Here's the guy who was the auditor. Like I said, it took him about 2 weeks. So here's what Clarence Barron said. Every get-rich scheme must have as its basis new claims of discovery or a new invention. The reason is people can't check on you. If you have something new, how are they going to verify it? That's what you need to run a scam. So again, my same things. What makes up a scam? What are the people like? What are the victims like? Sort of telling you. So there was a guy running a Ponzi scheme before Ponzi, but he didn't get caught till afterwards. So he was a guy named Leo Koretz in Chicago, and he stole $30 million. Ponzi only stole 15. He ran his scam for 18 years. So if he'd been caught first, we would have been calling it a Koretz instead of a Ponzi. But Ponzi got caught first, so he gets the naming rights. He sold land in Panama, just like that guy who was selling Poye in Honduras. Things just keep getting used over and over again. And so he sold stock in this thing that I think it was oil. He was saying he had oil, yeah. 60% returns. And then people went down and checked it out. And he said, yes, I knew the bubble would burst, but I was indifferent to just where or how things would stand. I was so disgusted with those seeming friends who wanted to get something for nothing. So he's stealing your money and he's saying it's your fault. So there's other scams. Anybody recognize him? There you go. There's Bernie. Okay. So he clearly has run the biggest scam. In real money, $20 billion. They got a lot of it back, but... So he started off with investing money through friends of his father-in-law. He lost their money. His father-in-law gave him money to pay them back, so he really didn't get caught. He was just bailed out. He also had a legitimate business. Besides the scam, he had a legitimate business trading stocks. So he was sort of on both sides of the fence. He started the NASDAQ, right, the whole NASDAQ exchange. He was testified in front of Congress. The SEC loved him. He was a deal. On the other side, he was stealing everybody's money, but he was a deal. There were warnings about Madoff. He got caught in the 80s with $442 million, and he wasn't registered as an investment advisor. And they caught him, but all they did was make him send the money back. Sort of like Ponzi getting caught and never going to jail. So they had a chance. They could have gotten Madoff early on. So Madoff's scheme was ingenious. So he would do this. He would say to you, what's your name? Nina. He would say, Nina, I would like Nina to make 20% this month. So he would print up fake transactions, put it on a piece of paper, print it out, and send it to Nina. She'd be like, I made 20%. Next month, what's your name?
Joanne.
Joanne, same thing. I'll give her 17%. So after the month was over, he would have fake trades to prove how much money they had made. There was no online system where you could check how much you had. You relied on what he sent you. There was no way to double check it. So that's how he did it. He just made up the trades. He had a whole office doing this. So he had one floor that was legit, doing trades. His sons ran that. And he had this other one on a different floor. The people he hired to run the scam were high school educated, shouldn't have been making more than like $50,000 a year. He paid them $1 million a year. But he was bribing them. He was keeping them quiet. That's why he did it. So they would never say anything, and they didn't have the education to know better. So they just kept going on and on. He also had a couple of backers that when he was short of money, excuse me, they would write him checks for $100 million. So when he was short, he had friends. Oh, also, this is the best part. So if he's running $1 billion company, you'd think he'd have a gigantic accounting firm. He had a one-man accounting firm in a strip mall, and the guy was next to a pizza parlor. One-man shop was auditing this whole thing. Nobody ever checked. He also had rules. So one rule was you can't tell anybody that you've invested with them, just like Sarah Howe. Remember, you got to keep quiet. I only take referrals. He would tell people, somebody would come to him and say, hey, I want to give you $1 million. No, I can't take it. Please, take $2 million. All right, fine, I'll take your $2 million. He made them feel like he was doing them a favor, taking their money. He also, his returns in 30 years had one down quarter. One. If any of you invest in the stock market, right, it goes like this every day. His were like impossible. If anybody wanted a redemption, he paid them right away. That way, you trusted him. Bernie must be doing it right. He gave me my money. And then he said his legitimate business helped him run his fake business, that he had an edge. Like I said, there was no online reporting. So here's some of his victims. Right, the actor and actress, Steven Spielberg and Katzenberg. These are just a few. Elie Wiesel and his charitable foundation. He almost lost the Mets, like the baseball team. He almost had to sell it because he had so much of his money with Bernie. And this guy, I didn't know of him. His name, Carl Shapiro, was worth a ton of money, owned a clothing line, was a huge benefactor to local charities. So where did Bernie get his victims? This is the Pine Brook Country Club. It's a Jewish club in Massachusetts. He was going after people who were like him. Where was his other place? Palm Beach Country Club, another Jewish club. It has nothing to do with whether it's Italian or Jewish or Irish or cat. It's just people who are like you. That's how they do it. I'll trust this guy. He's like me. He can't be doing anything bad. So where was the Securities and Exchange Commission? That's who regulates this stuff. They loved him for his legitimate business, so they're like, Bernie can't be doing anything wrong. 5 times they sent people in to investigate him, but they were all rookies and they didn't know what they were looking at. The head of the SEC got a letter saying Bernie's keeping 2 sets of books, and he didn't do anything about it. Just like the people who could have gotten Ponzi, these guys didn't get Madoff, and they had just as much information, if not more. So here's what Bernie thought about himself. There's nothing for me to change from. It's not like I ever considered myself a bad person. I just made a horrible mistake, and I'm sorry. Yeah, 20 billion mistakes to like 50,000 people. You didn't make one mistake. You made mistakes for 30 years. But really, I'm fine. It's not me, it's you. There were warnings about Madoff. So this is the most famous one. It's a guy in Boston, Harry Markopoulos. He wrote a book. It's kind of dry, but you get through like the first 100 pages, you sort of get the idea. I think there's also a Netflix thing on him. So his bosses came to him and said, Bernie is killing us getting our clients. We need to know how he's doing it. It took him 2 hours to figure out Madoff was running a scam. It took him 4 hours to document it. In one afternoon, he knew everything that Madoff was doing was a scam. So what did he do? He went to the SEC 4 times. He went after them in 2002. He sent them another note in 2001, another one in 2005, another one in 2007. The SEC and the U.S. attorneys ignored every one. Didn't even pay him attention. There was also, this guy wrote a famous article. He was editor-in-chief of a financial magazine. Madoff tops charts. Skeptics ask how. This was in 2001. People are calling him out. Most of those who are aware of his status are baffled by the way he has obtained consistent returns. People knew. This woman actually worked for Barron's magazine. She wrote the same sort of thing. He attacks, I won't go through the whole thing, but it basically said, Bernie told us, if you invest with me, you must never tell anyone that you're invested with me. It's no one's business. He was making people be quiet. Excuse me. So he was finally busted, and the only reason he was busted was the 2008 crash, because people wanted their money out. So they're calling him up saying, send me a check, send me a check, send me a check. And the people who were his backers didn't have enough money to give him. So he finally went to his 2 sons and said, I'm running a scam. And the next day his sons went to the FBI and got arrested. That's the only, he would still be doing it today if that hadn't happened, because nobody was looking. One of his sons, Madoff's sister and her husband, and another guy who was a wealth manager for like Queen Elizabeth and royal families, all committed suicide, among others. Okay? Bernie and his wife tried to kill themselves. Did not, obviously, but tried to. Hard to say if his wife knew or not. She was the bookkeeper for the company, but they don't think so. But on the other hand, they think she sort of just went like this. Didn't want to know. So he stole $20 billion from 40,000 people in 125 countries. They've gotten back about $19 billion with clawbacks. So people who thought they had hundreds of millions of dollars had to write a check back. And that money was then distributed to other people who had lost. So there was a lot of this, and perfectly legal. It was by a court-appointed trustee who did all this. But they got a lot of it back. He was sentenced 150 years in jail and passed away after doing 12. There have been other big scams. This guy, he was a Texas real estate tycoon, set up a bank in Antigua So he's going offshore. There's no U.S. banking regulations there. He says he can give you above average returns. Where have we heard that? I'm going to give you a higher rate of return. Give me your money in certificates of deposit, which are safe. He stole $8 billion. They recovered $1 billion. They don't know where the 7 went. So he's doing 110 years in jail. He'll never see the money, but he spent it. Any of you remember her? The blood lady. One drop of blood can figure out everything about you. She stole $700 million. Good show. And is doing 11 years in jail. Right? Crypto man. He stole $10 billion and is doing 25 years in jail. I like this one. Does any of you recognize the guy in blue? Which one? Dennis Rodman. Yes, very good. So she hung out with sports figures. She told everybody she had a Harvard MBA and a law degree, and she said she made so much money doing that she would invest your money without even charging you a fee. Just give me your money, and I'll earn your returns, and I won't charge you. Yeah. People did it. He did it among others. So she had a whole bunch of different names. Stole $6 million. Dennis Rodman, Ricky Williams, Travis Best, baseball, and McCants, I think he's football also. But she went after sports figures. Jail. So this woman she was a client relationship manager in Jamaica for wealthy people. Sorry, this is in the wrong order. So she forged emails letting her sell people's stocks. I know it's in the wrong order, I apologize. There she is. Very trustworthy. So guess who she scammed? You're going to recognize him right away. Usain Bolt, right? The world-class sprinter. Lost $13 million of his money to her. She was going after sports and other wealthy people in Jamaica. Yeah, no, he was... Wow. So these are some other people who've gotten scammed along the way. Sting, right? The recording artist. His accountant stole $9 million from him. Dane Cook, a Boston comedian. His brother-in-law took $12 million from him. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? He signed over a power of attorney, and the guy invested him in Arabian horses and oil wells. It's a lesson. Do not sign over your power of attorney. Recognize him? So this one's interesting. So he was on a plane with his wife, Christy Brinkley, and they're in coach, and his money manager is in first class. And Christy turned to him and said, "Why is he up there and we're back here?" So it turned out his brother-in-law stole $30 million from him, which may be why he's doing all those concerts in Madison Square Garden, because he's got to make up all the stolen money. So, again, my questions, and now you know the answers. Psychopaths steal your money. They promise great returns. Some people get too greedy and they think, even if we know it's bad, we'll get out before it happens. Not going to happen. Those con artists don't think they should work for money. They should just be given it. Actually, they should just have your money. Even better. So the moral of these stories, if it's too good to be true, it isn't true. By the way, stocks earn 8% over history. Bonds earn 4%. If anybody tells you different, they're lying. If they tell you it's guaranteed, they're lying. Nothing is guaranteed. Only invest with registered people. They have to register with the SEC. They have to register with the state. Make sure you check that stuff out. It's not hard to do. Do not sign your power of attorney. I know it's hard. You have family. You have to trust somebody. It's a hard thing to do, but sometimes it does not turn out well. Don't trust family and friends. Go to a professional. There are people who do this. It's better to pay a professional to take care of your money. lawyers, financial advisors, whatever. Nothing is guaranteed. Watch out for everyone is buying it. Send money now. Free lunch. I'll show you how to invest in things. Buy yourself a sub at Jersey Mike's. Watch out for affinity groups, religion, race, social, whatever. Stay away. That's how they'll come after you. So Ponzi actually, these are two good books about him. He wrote his own book, which is full of lies, but it's a good book. So Bernie Madoff, there's a good Netflix series and some books about him. It's worthwhile reading. So this all came about because I'm an author and I write my books, and they're sitting there with my wife behind them. So this is Conned. It's about Nantucket and scams on Nantucket. This one is, so I named these women Doppelschwindlers, and so they run Ponzi schemes to steal your money. This is my Ponzi book, so it's set in 1920, and somebody tries to get Ponzi caught. It's a good story. I like doing historical stuff. By the way, that picture, if it's in color, he looks really like a normal guy. You put him in black and white, he looks like a creep. This is my book on the Gardner theft, which is another historical one. Fun book to write and read. Let's see what else. Oh, so my books. Oh, wait, hold on. I went too fast. Okay, so that's the Gutenberg Bible. There's the Beatles paperback writer, ebook. Whoop. So my books are also an ebook and audio book. So you can listen to it like on your phone or on your car radio. It's not my voice, it's a professional voice. My paperbacks are $16 on Amazon, 20, hardcovers are 20. Isn't it? So you can buy the paperbacks or the hardcover for less. I'll gladly sign them if you want me to. If you buy two, there's more money off. My wife can do the math. And I'm on Facebook. I have a website. This is where I'm going to next. If you want to hear this presentation again. Oh, no. Oh, there's the wrong one. Oh. That's the wrong. I didn't change this slide. I'm going to be in Needham tomorrow. So if you want to come to Needham tomorrow, you can come and see this again. But I was in Vegas with Cher for a while, and that was a very interesting experience. Really, you don't believe that. Yeah, but I did help her out of her house that almost caught on fire the other day. So that's all. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoy it and learn a couple of things.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, and happy holidays to all of you.